Thank you very much for the opportunity to share a brief presentation with you today and share ideas on the economic prospects for recovery for the Philippines, issues related to the May 2022 elections and how we will hopefully COVID-proof those elections, and possible element of the reform agenda for the next administration, which I hope will include policies to tackle the deep-rooted inequality that may have been one of the main effects of the pandemic on our society. So without further ado, let me begin by showing you the first slide, which is the number of COVID-19 cases in the Philippines, in NCR, pretty much covering the last almost 2 years of the pandemic. And what this slide shows us is the inability of the country to contain the spread of the disease. And each time there is a threat of a surge because of that failure in containment, we have been pushed back into hard lockdown in order to save our health system from being essentially overwhelmed. The first few cases triggered a hard lockdown in April of 2020. That is understandable. That was when we knew very, very little about the disease. Then there was another hard lockdown in around August of 2020. This was essentially the result of our inability to contain the spread of the disease. And by then it was threatening to overwhelm our health system for the first time. And then there was another hard lockdown around April of this year, and then another one around September of this year. So that was the most recent one. In each of the hard lockdowns, there was obviously evidence that our containment strategy was not working, and that we needed to revert to such a costly method for saving our health system from being overwhelmed. So this is the situation that the country finds itself in right now. So there is now the concern that the country is literally back to being the sick man of Asia. This was the term used to describe the Philippines after the Marcos dictatorship, and we were trying to recover from the economic disaster created by that dictatorship. It seems that we are seeing some very, very troubling signs for our economy and our society at this point. As of October 2021, vaccination was only at roughly 25%, as opposed to Singapore's over 80%. So this is one of the big concerns for the country right now. There is a slow delivery of the vaccines and the possible risk of vaccine hesitancy in some sectors of our society. There is also the containment in the country that is weak, as I mentioned earlier, and we have been pushed back into a very costly measure for in order to protect our health system, and that is the hard lockdown. We have had 4 hard lockdowns in the past almost 2 years. There is, of course, the fear and great concern that because of our historical weakness in our containment, if we do face another threat of a surge, that we will be pushed back again to that costly strategy of applying a hard lockdown. The country that enjoys the dubious distinction of the longest general lockdown in the world across many countries that have faced the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is one of only 5 countries that have kept their schools closed for well over a year of the pandemic in 2020. So this is, of course, suggesting to us that we are paying a very, very high price to contain COVID-19. And this is the case because we are unable to put in place the means to apply a containment strategy that is much more cost effective, based on a stronger test, trace, treat, and quarantine system that would ideally enable us to keep our economy open, just like other countries that have not paid such a high price as we have, and still protected their citizens. And finally, the sobering facts that we are ranked in the bottom of pandemic resilience measures by different think tanks and analyst groups. Bloomberg ranked us 53rd of 53 countries. Nikkei Asia ranked us 121st of 121 countries. And Oxford Economics also ranked the Philippines last in Asia in terms of severity and economic scarring, meaning that we are at highest risk of economic scarring from the crisis. And this signals a very protracted recovery period for the country. And the bottom line is that from one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, prior to the pandemic, the Philippines suffered one of the worst economic contractions in 2020. And government forecasts it will take at least a decade to recover from the deep economic scarring due to its poor pandemic management. So this is, of course, very, very sobering economic facts that we face right now, and that will probably be top of mind for voters coming into May 2022, given the very, very deep effects of the pandemic on the society here in the Philippines. And just to note again that many analysts are recognizing that one of the big failures of pandemic management in the Philippines is that we have not been able to transition to a more cost-effective containment strategy. And this forces us back to hard lockdown, which is one of the most costly measures that we can put in place because of the effects of that hard lockdown on the functioning of our economy. So our way out in terms of economic recovery is to find a way to live with COVID-19, implement a stronger containment strategy, particularly for the threat of new strains, and bring out a general confidence again in our consumers and investors that we will not be forced back into hard lockdown in terms of future risks of new strains arriving in our shores. So this is the standing challenge for our pandemic management and economic recovery policies. So as I mentioned, the challenge for the Philippines, but also many other countries, it appears based on the latest available evidence, is to be able to find ways to live with COVID, to open up their economies and run their economies, while at the same time recognizing that COVID-19 risks are there. They just need to be minimized, and those risks need to be adequately managed. Now, without belaboring the point, there are several main factors in, based on the latest thinking right now on being able to live with COVID. And there is growing consensus on these several factors, one of which is mass vaccination. We don't know everything yet in terms of the disease, but certainly there's a lot of strong evidence in science emerging now on the impact of vaccination in terms of limiting hospitalizations and limiting the number of deaths due to COVID-19, and therefore better protecting a population from that disease. Second, of course, is the strengthening of the health and social protection systems, which we recognize is going to be likely part of a Build Back Better scheme to make health systems much more inclusive, and at the same time to help it to rapidly realign and strengthen itself when the threat of a pandemic arrives. And of course, this is the kind of Build Back Better scheme put in place by countries like Taiwan, countries like South Korea, which is why they were able to weather the COVID-19 pandemic much, much better than many other countries. And of course, the last point is to put in place and strengthen test, trace, treat, and quarantine systems, which is, as I mentioned, something that is still missing in the Philippines, and therefore forces us back into hard lockdown every time there is a threat of a surge that might overwhelm our health system. So the way that we manage the pandemic is likely going to affect also the prospects for May 2022 elections, because potentially it will become an election issue. And at the same time, it will affect likely the election itself in terms of managing the election, and in terms of voter turnout, as well as many other factors linked to the election. So COVID proofing the elections to protect voter turnout is going to be a big challenge for our election management agency, COMELEC, and looking at an international database of elections and plebiscites held in many different countries. I believe this is over 150 countries that have held elections and plebiscites in the past almost 2 years. There is evidence that 36% of these countries, there was an increase in voter turnout in those countries, but in 64% of the countries, there was a decline in voter turnout. So this is one of those concerns that for the Philippines and many other countries like it that have not been able to successfully contain the different risks of COVID-19, that there could be a chilling effect on voter turnout in May 2022. And the way to overcome that, of course, is to invest adequately and prepare adequately for the COVID proofing of the May 2022 elections, making sure that there are enough protocols in place and there are enough investments in place so that social distancing and other health protocols can be followed adequately when you cast your vote come May of next year. Of course, the other main element of preparing for the elections and implementing a robust recovery for the economy and our health sector would be to progress aggressively in our vaccination campaign. And here I just wanted to show you the statistics when I downloaded this around 25 October. It showed that we are vaccinating around 487,000, close to 500,000 doses per day in the Philippines. And based on that trajectory, it will take us about 205 days to reach 70% of the target population for vaccination, or by May 17 of 2022. So that raises the concerns that this comes a little too late to bring in the 70% target so that it gives us the stronger confidence during the campaign period going into the election day itself. So we're a little bit delayed in our vaccine rollout, and most likely in some parts of the country at least, there will be challenges in ramping up the target to 70%, where vaccine hesitancy has become sort of a constraint. Just as a comparator, I just want to show you the track record of Indonesia, which is vaccinating 1.5 million doses a day. And at that speed, it will take 134 days to reach 70% of its people vaccinated, or by 8 March of 2022. So it would appear that in order for us to adequately COVID-proof the May 2022 elections and maybe even give us a little bit more confidence during the campaign period, as well as mount an earlier economic recovery, we will need to be just as effective or even more effective as a country like Indonesia, which is vaccinating close to 3 times higher than what we're doing right now in the Philippines. So I just also wanted to mention, since we're on the topic of the May 2022 elections, that it's not all about the health pandemic, it's also about the governance of the campaign period and the elections. And one of the key governance issues is to ensure the independence and credibility of COMELEC through the proper appointment of independent commissioners into that body, given that there will be 3 commissioners retiring in February of 2022 and an additional commissioner slot that is actually vacant right now. So it will be key and it will be a primary concern for the competence and integrity of the commissioners, especially now as we approach a very important election. And this is a statement by our good colleague from NAMFREL, Eric Alvia. I share in that concern that hopefully the commissioners that will be appointed will be highly independent because for many reasons, this will be a very challenging election process and a very unique elections, since we will be holding it under pandemic conditions. So if there will be any challenges to the credibility of COMELEC, that will be quite detrimental to our democratic institutions. And hopefully there will be a credible set of commissioners that will help sort of usher a more stable campaign period and election day itself in terms of management and in terms of the integrity of the main agency tasked with managing that election process. I also want to emphasize before I close that possibly one of the big policy issues for the next administration, certainly as the Philippines and the entire world emerges from the pandemic, hopefully, is the deep economic scarring and the deep inequality that may have taken place, that may have been the main effect of the pandemic on different societies and certainly on the Philippines. I share with you a very simple cartoon that shows that some children may have been able to thrive during the pandemic. Their education may not have been stifled during this pandemic period, but many others are likely to have been constrained in terms of their access to technology, access to internet, access to quality education online, and therefore the impact of this situation on the unequalizing impact of this situation on our children and on the next generation is something that we will likely face for decades to come. So I agree with the recent study by NEDA, and hats off to our colleagues there that have raised deep concerns about this economic scarring and the possible unequalizing effect of the crisis on the country and essentially the next generation. So this is likely to be a key policy issue that we really need to think about in terms of what is our strategy to build back better and make sure that we don't come out of this crisis with even deeper poverty and even deeper inequality when we went into the crisis. So I just want to share this quote. We are not all in the same boat, meaning the pandemic has affected almost all of us, rich and poor alike. But we are all in the same storm, but some are in super yachts and some have just the one oar, meaning that some are able to thrive, but many others have been likely left behind. So with that, I want to end by sharing that we are part of a group called Participate. Participate is a pro-democracy coalition dedicated to strengthening citizens' participation in democratic processes and also contributing to a more informed voters for the May 2022 elections. We feel this is critical and we feel we will likely face a historic election in May 2022, given that it will be under pandemic conditions and also under very, very challenging economic conditions for the country. And we hope that citizens will engage. We will try to support and join many other organizations that are also trying to advance more informed voting and strengthen the democratic process in the campaign period and during the elections itself. And we hope that those listening, young people in particular, will be able to visit our website and perhaps explore how to join us and our different organizations. Right now, we have almost 2,500 organizations part of Participate. So with that, I want to thank the organizers for the chance to share this quick presentation. And I look forward to our exchange in the question and answer portion. Thank you very much.